This podcast is brought to you by Rebel News. That's right. So if you want to support us, why not do it in a win-win fashion by shopping for yourself? One of my favorite things to do. Head to rebelnewsstore.com to pick the patriotic gear that pleases your heart. And while you're there, use coupon code DREA10 to save while you do.
Hello, my friends. Incredible news out of Alberta. That province has decided to allow citizens to call for a referendum to separate, and they've made it much easier than before. Boy, we've got all the details. It's fascinating. But first, let me invite you to become a subscriber to Rebel News Plus. That's the video version of this podcast. Just go to rebelnewsplus.com. Click subscribe. It's $8 a month. I know you're thinking that's not a lot of money. Well, it may not be a lot of money to you, but boy, it sure adds up for us, because that's how we pay our bills. Because as you know, we don't take a dime from government, and it shows. Hey, one more thing.
Thanks for tuning into this podcast. If you appreciate the news that Rebel brings you, consider being a part of what makes it possible. You can do so by subscribing to our exclusive content at rebelnewsplus.com. That means get exclusive shows, documentary, behind the scenes, and more. And it's for a cheap price, as low as $8 to start. We appreciate your support.
Tonight, elbows up. Alberta defends itself against an abusive, faraway, hostile world leader who means it economic harm. I mean, Mark Carney, of course. It's April 30th, and this is the Ezra Levant Show.
Shame on you, you censorious thug.
I'm going to spend most of the show today talking to you about Alberta and what Danielle Smith, the Premier, is doing to fight back in a deeply serious and fundamental way to the war being declared on Alberta by the new Prime Minister, Mark Carney. But first, I want to talk for maybe 5 or 10 minutes about the results of the election. And again, I'm going to let it go, but there was something I noticed today that I thought you might find interesting. Now, some people say I'm being too positive about the election results. I mean, a close second place is just a fancy way of saying loser, I guess. And when measured against the benchmark of what 6 months ago we all thought would happen, of course, it was a disaster on Monday. I'm not thrilled that Pierre Poilievre lost his own seat either, but that's what a combination of redrawing a riding to change its demographics, and mass migration will do to a country or a district. We'll see how he remedies that. Now, I have not heard a single Conservative, other than the Conservatives in name only in Ontario's provincial PC party, and they ran a demoralization campaign against their federal counterparts. I haven't seen or heard a single real Conservative Party member call for Pierre Poilievre to step down. The opposite. The result, 41.3%, was the highest the party had received since the 1980s. Trump was obviously a factor, but his comments didn't seem to put that much of a dent into the Conservative vote at all, actually. Let me show you the polling again. I don't always trust Wikipedia. You always have to check the sources and the links, but Wikipedia is good at compiling things. For example, they have every single poll done in the 2025 election campaign. So scroll down here and look at the dates. This is every poll by every single company. As you can see, sometimes there are several polls every day during the campaign. So Poilievre wound up with 41.3% on election day. But scroll, and other than one smaller pollster called Main Street, which had the Conservatives at that level in a couple of polls, there wasn't a single poll that put the Conservatives that high in the entire campaign. So the campaign exceeded every single pollster's prediction, except for those few from Main Street. But actually, my real point is this. Keep scrolling down to last summer and spring. So I'm talking about 2024, when Justin Trudeau was still in power, when Mark Carney was frolicking in Europe, and the Conservatives were looking great. But look at what you see there. The Conservatives were at 40, 41, 42. The odd poll put them at 43 or whatever. Do you see my point? Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives actually did as well as pollsters said they would do back in the glory days of 2024. Even with Doug Ford's griping, the Conservative vote held. All that changed, obviously, is the controlled demolition of the NDP and the Green Party. Tell me where I'm wrong. That's the difference between operating in a multi-party system versus a two-party system in a center-left country. And it was so noticeable in Jagmeet Singh's speech on election night. He didn't express a drop of emotion or concern or remorse or sorrow about the detonation of his party. He really didn't. He mentioned it in passing. He seemed quite glad that he lost. Why would he want to stick around and preside over the wreckage of what he had just ruined? Here, let me choose a poll at random from last April. Here's one from a French-Canadian pollster named Pallas. I frankly haven't heard of them, but I just picked it at random. You can see what I mean. In this poll, 41% of people were for the Conservatives, 26% for the Liberals, 18% for the NDP. So that's when everything looked awesome. Majority government territory. Then the NDP and the Greens quit, and their vote went to the Liberals, and the Liberals won. I'm not making excuses. I mean, a loss is a loss. But the Conservatives performed as well on Monday as the poll said they would have performed a year ago against Justin Trudeau. It's just that the opposition was split then, and it united during the campaign. So sure, the Trump factor hurt, but I think only in terms of pushing the NDP and the Greens behind the Liberals. I don't think it chipped away at the Conservative numbers, not in any meaningful way. All right, thanks for letting me get that out of my system, but seriously, don't you think it's interesting that the Conservative number on Election Day really didn't change from their numbers last year? I don't know. I think it's interesting. What we do with it, I don't know. Fact is, Mark Carney won. Okay. The election's over. Maybe I'm trying to find a silver lining. But Alberta, let's talk about Alberta. They have done something very interesting. Here, take a look at this.
Is the door still open to Alberta separating? I feel that question wasn't directly answered.
Well, not by me. I believe in Alberta's sovereignty within a united Canada. However, there is a citizen-initiated referenda process that if citizens want to put a question on a ballot and get enough of their fellow citizens to sign that petition, then those questions will be put forward. Again, I don't want to prejudge what a question might be, but not by our government.
After the break, we'll talk about that with Keith Wilson, the lawyer for the trucker convoy, who has now directed his mind to the prospect of Alberta just leaving. Stay with us for more.
These changes will ensure that all Albertans have ample opportunity to have their say at election time and that Alberta's elections are open, secure, and accessible. We are expanding opportunities for Albertans to be involved in direct democracy by making changes to the threshold needed for successful citizens' initiatives. The signature collection time for citizens' initiatives will be extended from 90 days to 120 days. We are also improving the process by setting the threshold to be 10% of the number of eligible voters who participated in the last general election, as opposed to being either 10 or 20% of total registered voters. Additional amendments will update rules to make it easier for Albertans to hold their elected officials accountable through MLA recall. These changes would extend the recall signature collection time from 60 days to 90 days and lower the signature threshold to be 60% of the total number of electors who voted in the electoral district in the most recent election, as opposed to 40% of the total number of electors in the riding. Recall legislation and citizens' initiatives give Albertans more ways to be directly involved in democracy and to have their say on issues that matter to them.
That's Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. Now, hearing that, especially if you're not from Alberta, you might say, oh, those are some Alberta things, recall, citizens initiative. That sounds like wonky Reform Party stuff. And indeed it is. Preston Manning talked about giving people democratic tools like recall, which is when you don't like a politician, you can call them back. You don't have to wait till the end of an election. Citizens initiative, that means when you put a bill or a law forward, again, not from the legislature, but from the people. But I think of those things, they're very important, and that's part of the Alberta spirit. But of course, the constitutional referendum and the lowering of the threshold of it is by far the most important thing, I think, that the Premier said. And you may say, well, this sounds out of the blue. What's this got to do with anything? Well, it has to do with everything, including the re-election of globalist, socialist, environmentalist, anti-oilist Mark Carney. Because as you may know, because we've talked about it before, in Canada, secession, that is leaving Canada, it's not banned, it's not illegal, it's not an act of war as it was in the United States during their Civil War. It is positively legal. In fact, the law prescribes precisely how to do it. And by lowering the threshold to 10% of people who voted in the previous election, as opposed to 20% of every possible voter, Premier Smith has just made it tremendously more accessible for people to trigger a secession vote. Shots fired. Joining us now to talk about this is Keith Wilson, King's Counsel, a lawyer in Alberta. You may know him from the Freedom Convoy, but he's also someone dedicated to Alberta's sovereignty. He joins us now via Skype. Keith, great to see you again. Did I properly understand the import of what Premier Smith did?
Yeah, and what's important to understand for your viewers is that while the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that any province can vote to leave Canada, to become independent, to secede, the triggering event for that is a referendum, and it's the provincial legislatures that control the details of what that referendum looks like. In Alberta, we have the referendum statute that's been on the books for quite some time. And in that statute, the cabinet itself can call for a referendum on separation. But we have this new law called the Citizens Initiative legislation, initially brought in by Jason Kenney when under the UCP, that provided a process for citizens themselves to get together and compel the government of Alberta to hold a referendum on separation. The problem, of course, and you've commented on this in other broadcasts, is it was a very complex piece of legislation and very difficult to meet the threshold. The threshold was 600,000 signatures over the period of 90 days. Well, what the Premier announced yesterday is that legislation's being amended. So the threshold for citizens to force the government to hold a referendum on separation is now lowered from 600,000 voters to 177,000, and there's 120 days to secure those signatures instead of just 90. So it's a big change that will make it Alberta more democratic and give greater say to the citizens.
It's dramatic. I mean, I have said before that I thought that the way Jason Kenney, when he was premier, put these laws on the books is I found it, frankly, I'm not going to say deceptive, but it was a placebo. It was fake. The levels were so high and it was so impossible to do that it would be only the most extreme, like once a century cases that would rise to those levels. To me, it felt like a fake bone thrown to Democrats and populists, because frankly, Jason Kenney, and I've known him for a while, he's never really been a populist. But I think what Danielle Smith has done is she hasn't created this law, she's just adjusted it to turn it from a fake thing that you hang on the wall to point to when someone says, how come you don't have more democracy? Oh, we have the bill. To turn it from a fake thing to a real thing that may actually be used. I think it is absolutely doable to have 177,000 signatures in 120 days. Obviously, you would want to get far more to make sure that there was no disqualification of some, but I think that's absolutely doable. The population of Alberta is approximately 5 million. I don't know the absolute latest. Could you get 1 in 25 or 1 in 30 Albertans to sign a referendum? And by the way, they're not saying they agree with the referendum. They just are allowing it to be held. I think it's possible. And I think it is a very clever way that Danielle Smith is sending a message to Mark Carney that Alberta's got its elbows up.
Absolutely. And I do think it is doable. The previous one, I felt the sentiment was so strong that it was possible. I was not naive about the challenges of getting 600,000 signatures in that short a period of time. This is most definitely doable. And there's even a mechanism, Ezra, for in real time each week, for example, you can submit the signatures you have so they get vetted in real time. So let's say you submit a batch of 50,000 signatures. You can find out the next week that they're going to accept 48,000 of them. So you know you're now 2,000 short, as opposed to submitting it all at the end and they invalidate a certain number of them and you end up being short by 1,000. So there's even that fairness in the process, that transparency that I think is going to ensure that when a group comes forward to make the move to actually circulate the specific petition, that we will get 200,000 plus. So there'll be no doubt that we've met the threshold.
Yeah. And even if, let's say you got 176,000 out of the 177,000, it remains, as you mentioned, within the power of the cabinet to hold a referendum. So if it was effectively there, but through the equivalent of a clerical error or a typo, it didn't quite cross the threshold, the premier could call the referendum nonetheless. But here's the thing, and I've been thinking a lot about this in recent weeks. Most of the media in Alberta is run out of Toronto. And I suppose Rebel News is the same way. I live in Toronto, even though my heart is very Western. I was born in the West. Our chief reporter, Sheila Gunn-Reid, is based in the West. We love the West, but it is a fact we're in Toronto. But that said, I own the company, so it's not like we're run by the Laurentian elites. I regard myself as a bit of a rebel here in Toronto. But most of the media in Alberta are like the radio stations, the newspapers, the TV stations. They are owned and operated out of Toronto. And I do not think, Keith, that the corporate owners, like let's say CTV, and I'm not picking on them, but I'm using them as an example. CTV is owned by Bell. Bell is a massive company of which CTV is a tiny part. It's not even an important part. Do you really think that BCE Enterprises, Bell Canada Enterprises, is going to allow its CTV reporters to reflect the will of the people, or will they turn into a smashing machine to smash anyone who dares to support this? The CBC, it goes without saying, they were just offered a $150 million bribe by Mark Carney to do his bidding. Of course, they're going to smash. The radio stations as well. My point is, whoever pops their head up to do this is going to be subject to the most vicious cancel culture smear machine we have ever seen in this country. If you think what they did to Pierre Poilievre was bad, if you think what they did to Preston Manning and Stockwell Day was bad, all those guys wanted to do is be a part of the system. But imagine if Albertans say, we're done being part of the system, we want to leave, we're taking our 170 billion barrels of oil with us, and we may be the first domino to go. I think we're talking deep state involvement. We all worried about the assassination of Donald Trump, and it came within an inch of it. When you're talking about 170 billion barrels of oil, when you're talking about changing entire country boundaries, there will be nothing that isn't thrown at this. I just fear the greatest battle, the greatest hatchet job, the greatest assassination, the greatest fear campaign ever seen in Canada. I'm not focused on that. I'm not riveted by that. I just have a terrible premonition that if Albertans dare to take their destiny in their own hands, the same way Quebec has now done twice, that those Albertans will be ground into powder. What do you think?
I agree entirely. I was speaking with a litigator, another lawyer yesterday, who's never been involved in fights like this. And as you know, Ezra, I've been on the front line of some very difficult situations, both in Alberta, where I fought the Stelmach government and brought them down, the old PCs, under property rights issues, and then being on the front lines in Ottawa during COVID mandates and Freedom Convoy. So I know I've got the bruises and the scars from those fights, and I know what they take. And what I cautioned this other lawyer about is I said, right now it's being like in a lawsuit where on the other side, it's a self-represented party. And we're just mopping the floor, right? As experienced litigators, I said, there's wolf packs and dream teams about to show up on the other side. The Laurentian elite are not going to let this cash cow go. Yeah. They're not going to want us to get out of this relationship where they can milk us and they can have all these huge amounts of money go to them and us be their play toy for their extremist policy implementations. So yeah, we're going to have a fight on our hands. There's going to be dirty tricks played. There's going to be attempts to, they're probably going to put so much pressure on me that I may lose some clients. I'm prepared to do that. If it gets too hot for my clients, I'll certainly understand if they want to get a different lawyer on their litigation files. But not only what you just point out. So we're going to have all of the media, but for a few like yourself, are paid for by the federal Liberals. Right. That's just a fact. Yeah. So they're going to do everything they can to appease their paymaster. They're going to have all the political consulting firms that they deploy in the campaigns developing smear stuff coming after us. They're going to have bot attacks on social media. But there's another factor that's going to even juice this up even more, which is Donald Trump in the United States of America. Clearly Trump has aspirations and sees the value of Alberta and Saskatchewan likely becoming part of the United States. Now, it doesn't matter what my view and other views are on that. That's his view. So we're going to potentially have the State Department and other agencies within the U.S. government advancing positions to help one side or the other. So this is going to be a very wild time in Canadian history, without a doubt.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is Donald Trump is such a polarizing figure, and he had he knocked the Canadian election off its balance. Even today, his comments were odd, saying Pierre Poilievre hated Trump more, which is clearly not true.
No, well, I think we're going to have a great relationship. He called me up yesterday. He said, "Let's make a deal." He was running for office. They both hated Trump, and it was the one that hated Trump, I think, the least that won. I actually think the conservative hated me much more than the so-called liberal. He's a pretty liberal guy. But no, I spoke to him yesterday. Couldn't have been nicer, and I congratulated him. It was a very mixed signal because it's almost even, which makes it very complicated for the country. It's a pretty tight race, but he's a very nice gentleman, and he's going to come to the White House very shortly, within the next week or less.
But even if it were true, so he likes the result that Mark Carney won. I don't even know if that's true. Trump
and he complimented Carney.
Yeah, he's weighing in, and the thing is, Canadians, even Canadians who are sympathetic to Trump, don't want an outside force deciding Canadian things. I think it's like if one family was having a family conversation and a neighbor overheard it over the fence,
right, and
the neighbor came up to the fence and say, "Hey, let me give you my opinion about your family matters."
Yeah.
Even
Marge is right.
Yeah, people would say, "Buzz off! Who the heck are you?"
Yeah.
Even, in fact, it might even turn the family members again. So, and that's the thing. Trump could scupper it because Trump has expressed his interest in the 51st state. Trump has not been skillful or precise or articulate over the last few months, and I think he helped install Mark Carney. I don't actually think he meant to do it. I don't actually think he was deeply briefed. I think his mind is on Ukraine, Russia, Iran, China, Mexico, Abraham Accords Round 2, deporting illegals, getting cabinet members approved by the Senate, which isn't even completely done. So he's got so many things that are obviously a higher priority for him. I think Canada was like a punchline to a joke that he used Governor Trudeau. That was he got a laugh. So, it's when you tell a joke and you get laughs, you keep telling that joke wherever you go. I think that's all it is. And I think Trump's banter, which I normally love, is what gave us Mark Carney as PM. And I think Trump, if he said, I really like this referendum would probably sink it. But if he said, oh, I don't like this referendum, no one would believe it. I think the answer is for him to say, it's a Canadian affair and we'll stay out of it. But I don't even know if that's the case, because if I was the CIA, I would very much want 170 billion barrels of oil. Although, as I keep telling my American friends, you've already got unfettered access to it through the USMCA trade deal. Like, you literally can take all the oil you want. There's a side letter to the USMCA which gives America preference. I mean, that is the wild card. What Trump might do or might not do. Do you think Albertans would proceed ahead, would barge on no matter what?
Well, first of all, I'm very much alive to that, and that's why I brought it up. Is that we've got to get out in front of this to the extent that Trump is just absolutely that, a wild card. Any kind of scenarios and gaming out I'm doing strategically, I map things out, and then as soon as I do the Trump overlay, I just swoosh all the papers away, because the strategy, you can't plan for it. But what we can do, and those like myself who have reached the decision personally that the best thing for my kids and grandkids is for Alberta to be independent and leave Canada, the Confederation, is make clear that the decision that will be in the referendum, when I think it comes, and I think it's going to come soon given the announcement from yesterday, the actual independence referendum, is that the question they're considering is not whether to leave Alberta or leave Canada and join the United States. The question that's being asked on the referendum is whether or not Alberta is going to become independent, a sovereign country. And then only after that should we enter into consideration of whether we want to change our relationship with our main trading partner, the United States. That this is not a referendum on joining the United States. This is a referendum on Alberta's independence, its freedom, and its sovereignty.
Mm-hmm. You know, a week ago, I was in the Isle of Man. I was looking into Brookfield Asset Management's tax avoidance strategies. And it's this little island between Ireland and the UK. They obviously speak English. It is a crown territory. Like, King Charles III is their sovereign, but they have their own laws in many things. They have their own currency. It's called the Manx pound. It's tied 1-for-1 to the British pound, but it's sort of a semi-sovereign place. We didn't have to show our passports to get there, but it's interesting. And I just am thinking to myself, a little joke, maybe if Alberta becomes a lower tax place, maybe Brookfield Asset Management will actually move its headquarters to Alberta. That's not a funny joke, but it made me think. Hey, I got a question for you. I'm of your vintage, so I remember the big referendum in the 90s, and of course there was one a generation earlier in Quebec. I mean, the Quebec referendums. Yes. They've had a couple, and I remember very clearly the response from the entire establishment in Ottawa, the Liberal Party, the Conservative Party, all the media, all of it. It was when Quebec sovereigntists or separatists, they use different language, when they would make a demand, it wasn't met with anger or rage or threats. The establishment said, we'll give you that, just stay. What are your terms? Just stay. And it was within 0.5%, the last referendum. And even after that, the payoffs, the bribes, some would say, the compromises, that's where the Liberal government engaged in the so-called sponsorship scandal. The federal government decided they were going to sponsor everything, every building, every carnival, every concert, and have the word Canada and the Canadian flag there. They spent $250 million. And so much of that was stolen and kicked back to the Liberal Party. So there was a lot of criminal elements, as you get with the Liberals. But putting aside the crime, my point is their response to Quebec separatists in the moment was, please don't go. We'll accommodate you. We'll give you distinct society status. We'll give you guaranteed seats on the Supreme Court. We'll give you special constitutional rights. We'll give you so much spending. Please, please, please don't leave. We love you, baby. Come back. And when they almost left, the love didn't stop. Billions more flowed. That was how Quebec separatists were treated. How do you think Alberta separatists will be treated?
With disdain. It's remarkable, the attitude. You even saw it when Carney, halfway through the election campaign, mocked Premier Smith. There's this arrogance that I find with the federal Liberals, where they just think they know better. They think all of us out here in the prairies are hicks and unsophisticated, blue collar workers. That's partly what's driving this wave of separatism. Is Albertans are tired of being treated poorly. Albertans recognize the value of their work and what we contribute to Canada. And if we're not going to be appreciated, well, we'll keep that wealth here and we'll do better things with it and spend the money more wisely than the federal government will. So, it'll be interesting to see if Carney changes tack. I think he's concealed his true ambition, which is he wants Canada to be an experiment. He wants to show the world that we can get to net zero, that we can get to strictly electric vehicles, that we can, magically, as he said in one of his scrums, he said, we're going to put a carbon tax or, tax emissions from heavy emitters so that Canadians can get less expensive heat pumps. And I'm like, this guy's nuts. And then on top of that, in his election acceptance speech, he said that our relationship with the United States is over.
Yeah.
This guy, I'm seeing no indication that anything he said on the campaign trail is true. He was caught, saying in Alberta that he supports pipelines, and then in Quebec that he'll block them. He said that he's going to make Canada into an energy superpower, and then he qualified it in a media scrum close to the election day, where what he meant was a renewable energy superpower. There's no such thing. You can't export renewables on scale outside of hydro. So it's going to be interesting times to see who the real Mark Carney is and whether there's going to be any attempt at reconciliation from the federal government to the prairies, or whether they're going to continue to pursue their extremist failed policies and keep their knee on our economic neck.
Yeah. I've often wondered who could be a leader of this movement. I know there are people who are doing certain parts of the work, but typically a leader is someone who has some authority, some gravitas, maybe a household name. The trucker convoy started in a way leaderless. It was sort of an organic, authentic, spontaneous movement. Now leaders emerged, including Tamara Leach, who you and I know well. But it didn't start that way. It was almost like, I don't even know how to describe it, but it was kind of a group consciousness, like we got to do something, and oh yeah, I'm going to join in. And I guess what I'm saying is, now that I think about it, if the referendum can be called with just 177,000 people saying yes, and if the question is, as you described, clear and, it's going to be a brutal campaign, but maybe it would be leaderless, and maybe it can be leaderless. Because I'm just thinking anyone who had the province-wide name recognition would either be destroyed immediately by the establishment or undermined in some way. Like I'm just trying to think, like Preston Manning, he's if I recall, he's around 80. He might be even actually a little bit older. I think he's 82 actually. But the thing is, if it's a citizen's vote, it can be leaderless. It can have 100 leaders, or it can be a decentralized leadership.
It can, and only in one circumstance, in my view. I witnessed firsthand. I was on the ground for 22 days during the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa, and was in all the key places throughout that historic protest. So I got to witness firsthand what was happening, particularly behind the scenes. And what was always remarkable to me was how everybody was there for the exact same reason. They all had the same notional mission statement. They all had the same outcome in mind. And I'm really starting to notice parallels with the various Albertans that I'm meeting who I've never met before. So not people I know and old friends. I'm paying attention to that too, but people I've never met before. And I'm noticing that they all have this same sense that the future prosperity of our children and grandchildren is being compromised by these extremist failed policies, the reckless spending, and the holding back of our province in terms of its economic potential. You can grab anybody at random. They'll give you all those three things. And they're all action focused. Their call to action is to support a yes vote to get us independent. So it's one of the challenges is going to be that there's so many different groups trying to go in slightly different directions. But we're early into this. I think the real difficult challenge now is not going to be to get the citizen initiative petition to the threshold to compel the Alberta government to hold a referendum. The real fight is going to be convincing enough Albertans to vote yes in the referendum on separation, so that the results are super clear in terms of it being a very clear majority, not a close majority, so that will strengthen our hand in the negotiations that will follow with the other provinces, the federal government, and the First Nations.
Yeah. Well, I've said it before, if Alberta goes, I think it's quite likely that Saskatchewan will go within a year or two. And at that point, Canada's internal balance, the remainder of Canada, falls apart. It's basically Ontario plus. And it wouldn't surprise me if British Columbia or part of British Columbia would be another domino. And then where would the North go? Where would the Northwest Territories and the Yukon go? A lot of things would be afoot. And I don't know how that would end, but it could be that Mark Carney's election, as Preston Manning prophesied in the Globe and Mail, would be the last election of a prime minister of a united Canada. Mark Carney lacks a sense of Canada because he's been away for so long. You can tell it in little things he says, cultural references that are a decade or two old. He doesn't understand things. He hasn't followed things. He mixes up Keystone XL pipeline with Trans Mountain Pipeline. Listen, a regular person, of course, he's not going to know the difference, but he's clearly a guy, a politician who doesn't, those are huge things. He doesn't know. He hasn't been following. He's been busy saving the world from global warming, and then he saw this opportunity. So I think that he lacks an empathy and an understanding, and he's tone deaf in his own way. And he really is a VVIP. He really is at home at the World Economic Forum in Davos. He really is at home hanging out with Ghislaine Maxwell. That's his tribe. When Prince Andrew threw a lavish party for Mark Carney at Buckingham Palace, that's his happy place. That kind of guy in Alberta, I don't know how he'll work. I mean, he's the kind of guy who has police arrest independent journalists. I think it's going to be independent journalists leading the way on this, because any corporate journalist is going to be cut off at the knees. Keith, we're going to talk about this many times in the months ahead, I'm sure, because it's so fascinating. And I'm trying to get my head around it. My friend and colleague Sheila Gunn-Reid has announced a new website, and I haven't visited it yet. It's called donegetingscrewed.com. And Sheila loved that, and she chose it. I'm not about to tell her no. I think we got some fun stuff there, and I actually haven't watched that yet. So maybe I'm a little nervous about what's at that website, donegetingscrewed.com. But that's Sheila's response to Mark Carney. So we'll see. And Keith, you and I, let's stay in touch on this. And I think this is going to be the story of the year.
Elections are about vision and aspirations. After elections, true leaders have to deal with real serious problems affecting real people in their daily lives. I don't think Carney's got it. So yeah, it's going to be a very, very interesting time. And then we have the complete wild card of Donald Trump. And we're in interesting times, my friend, for sure.
Great talking with you, Keith Wilson, King's Counsel, a lawyer for the Freedom Convoy and a man deeply involved in the thinking and strategy behind Alberta's possible referendum. Keep in touch. Stay with us. Your letters to me are next. Hey, welcome back. Your letters to me. Dean writes, if Canadians didn't learn their lesson with Trudeau, it's likely they'll never learn. Well, here comes more pain. I mean, higher taxes, more debt, continued war on fossil fuels, which means more unemployment, massive immigration and censorship. It really is going to be as bad as Trudeau or worse. Laura says, can we be assured there was zero political interference? Now, I don't know who you mean. We had several indications when the National Security Committee that's in charge of monitoring for foreign interference said China was interfering. That happened 2 or 3 times during the campaign, and everyone just shrugged. In fact, Mark Carney didn't fire anyone. He waited for one of his candidates to resign, but the successor, who was also deeply in bed with the Chinese Communist Party, continued through to Election Day. Valerie Hawks says, from Ontario, I would like to apologize to Alberta. Please remember not all of Ontario voted for this. As for Doug Ford, he just lost 6 votes from my family. Doug Ford was atrocious. Doug Ford was an underminer. He was a demoralizer. And what's interesting to me is Doug Ford got a lower vote in Ontario as a percentage than Pierre Poilievre did. He just had the good luck of having a split Liberal and NDP party. Well, that's our show for today. Until tomorrow, on behalf of all of us here at Rebel World headquarters to you at home, good night, and keep fighting for freedom.